Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining ELT Live 10. It's good to have you join us, and what we want to do this afternoon is run through a range of responses to some of the questions that you've raised on Slido, as usual. I'd also like to start in a moment by giving you a bit of a flavour of the recent Leaders Conference that we had about 2 weeks ago now in the organisation. Dan's going to share with you a current update on where things are at in terms of the second wave of the pandemic. And then we're going to touch on other issues to do with staff well-being, to do with Christmas, to do with Epworth House, and to do with issues to do with some of our financial matters and insurance. So please continue to ask questions as we go through the next 50 minutes to an hour, and we'll try and respond to them as they come through. So first of all, I'd just like to tell you a bit about the conference that we held 2 weeks ago. It was our first venture into doing things virtually, and we had a specially commissioned platform that enabled us to put on the event, and we had about 300 of our colleague leaders from across MHA attend on both afternoons, the Tuesday and the Wednesday afternoon. The event was hosted on this platform, and it enabled us to both do some presentation kind of events, but also to have quite a lot of engagement between colleagues on tables like chat rooms that were available throughout. I think we went into it with real trepidation as to whether it would work, but actually it worked way better than we thought. And I think it gave us an insight into how we could do a more blended conference in the future, combining both the real event, but also then opening the conference out for different parts of the event itself, so that other colleagues can join us, maybe for things like the Oscars, maybe for some of the key presentations, so that we can get the messaging out real time to everybody at the same time. The theme of the conference was leading in uncertain times, which, given our journey since March and lockdown in England from the Wednesday the 4th, which was actually, the first day of the conference, the Wednesday and the Thursday, it couldn't have been more timely. We did actually consider postponing the conference because on the previous Saturday, you'll remember that the Prime Minister announced that there was going to be the second lockdown. But we felt that if ever there was a time we needed to engage with colleagues, it was now. So on the first afternoon, we very much spent time focusing on, I suppose, the well-being of colleagues and also on the journey that we've been on. And I'm really pleased that this time, for the first time, we've actually managed to capture the whole event on a digital format, a brochure that will be coming out to colleagues in the next couple of days, because we were able then to share what actually went on and the sorts of things that were spoken about, and also some of the exercises that you and your teams can then do out in homes and schemes and within colleague groups at Epworth House. So the first day, as I say, was very much focused on where we've been, and there was an incredibly moving film watching all that we had been through, particularly since March, all the efforts, people going above and beyond. And that led into an opportunity where we could really focus on well-being. And obviously with something like a conference where you've got 300 participants, you are trying to cascade this out to all the people who are leading teams and colleagues across the organisation, so that they can then share that out to other colleagues in their teams with kind of like the messages and with the, I suppose, the ethos that we're trying to convey. So the sessions within the afternoon were then about well-being and about taking time to stop, to stand back, to take care of ourselves, and also how we need to flex our leadership skills during such difficult times. In the evening, we then had a more relaxed conversation about some of the issues and the themes that had come up during the day. And I note on Slido that there was a question that had come through about the goodie boxes that went out to all the participants at the conference, and how there was only those 300, if you like, who got that goodie box. I suppose what I'd say in response to that, and to perceptions that maybe that isn't as valuing as everybody, is I know out in your schemes, homes and teams, there are opportunities when you sit down with your managers and where you celebrate something and where you put on something for your team in order to, I suppose, commemorate or to mark or to celebrate an event that you're doing. And I know that your managers and leaders do that out in your home schemes and teams. Similarly, when we pull together a conference like this, it's a very rare event that we get all our leaders from across the organisation together. And this was just a small gesture of recognition and a small gesture to say thank you for all that they had done, but also to mark the fact that we were coming together to meet in this way. So I hope people understand that when you do things like this, sometimes you're doing it just because this is the immediate cohort of people who you are needing to connect with at that event. And clearly there have been other ways in which we have tried to show, as is so vital, how we value what it is that you are all doing out in home schemes and teams, how through just the things like the hampers and the chocolates, through things that are going to be talked about in terms of Christmas, we're trying to say how much we appreciate how much you are all going above and beyond. So that was day one. And then on the second afternoon, we were very much looking forward. We reviewed the progress of our work on culture and looked particularly at things like our EDI progress around our Engaging Leaders programme, work in terms of fundraising, and also in terms of how we communicate more effectively across the organisation. And we then did a review of our business plan to date and how remarkably, despite COVID, we have moved forward so many agendas over the past year. One of the crucial elements of that, though, was talking with colleagues about how we need to get the pace and momentum right when we're doing this, because we completely appreciate the pressure on our capacity at the moment with the pandemic and the need to adapt our pace at times so we don't flood people with either new asks or requests in terms of what they're already trying to do. So it was very much a conversation about how we prioritise the work that we need to take forward alongside our emergency response to the pandemic. We also explored later on that afternoon the service-specific themes. So our colleagues from Homes got together, retirement living, from MHA communities, and also from Epworth House to look at bespoke seminars. And then we had some feedback around that, which we're collating still, and we'll be using that to help us guide our way forward. And then we wrapped it all up with a Q&A session at the very end. And there's a lovely video that I know will be coming out on the brochure where we have many of our residents and members saying thank you to you for all that you do and just how special you all are. One of my colleagues, and I hope you get this when you receive the brochure, said, but boy, did we need a fix of what it is that MHA is all about. And I hope when you see the information in the brochure that you get that sense when you share it with your teams, because it was very special to be able to come together. And clearly, I hope next year it will be in real time and we'll be able to celebrate things like the Oscars going forward. So I'm going to hand over now to Dan. Obviously, you'll be aware that we've moved back to Gold Command last week. So Dan's going to update you on our progress in terms of the second wave. Dan.
Thank you, Sam. Afternoon, everybody. Yeah, so I think we can safely say that we're definitely in wave 2 now, after what felt like some welcome respite towards the back end of the summer and in the autumn. The number of cases of COVID that we're now dealing with is increasing again. So as of today, across MHA Homes and Schemes, we have 112 residents and 108 staff or colleagues who have tested positively, and that's across 49 of our homes and schemes. In relation to those residents, about 50% of those are symptomatic, and in relation to our colleagues, about 30%. In terms of how that's affecting and what the spread of that looks like, 41 of our homes and schemes are currently in a kind of formal public health outbreak. Only 24 out of those currently have 2 or more cases. And the other thing that I just want to mention is that those large numbers, 220 cases across our residents and colleagues, About a third of all of those cases are in one home in Aberystwyth at Havnew Wine. And I just want to acknowledge the tremendous collective effort that there has been across the organisation to support the home with that. I want to add my thanks, and I know that thanks have already gone out, but I think we're all incredibly grateful to those colleagues, our carers, domestics, the maintenance staff, the chaplains, deputy managers and area managers who have all selflessly agreed to give up their time, leave their families for a period of time and go across to Aberystwyth to support the home to manage that significant outbreak. And once again, it's a real example of one MHA in action, and it's incredible to be part of. In terms of the kind of broader picture and how things are developing, you will be aware that but both through ourselves and also through what you've read in the media, that there are now pilots underway around testing for family members. Currently 20 homes across the southwest are part of that pilot scheme. There's also a pilot scheme underway around saliva testing, which I expect to be rolled out soon for those residents and hopefully for those colleagues who struggle with the swab testing. In terms of visiting, you'll be aware of the guidance that came out following lockdown around the use of screens. And I just want to re-emphasize that guidance refers to an example of floor to ceiling screens, but doesn't necessarily mean that screens have to be floor to ceiling. And it also refers to the potential for booths and pods. I know that Paula Ludlow and Neville Parbo are leading a piece of work to review the environment right the way across the estate and support you to prepare for that and make sure that we've got COVID safe or COVID mitigated spaces for indoor visits to be carried out. Again, just kind of want to add my thoughts on that, just a recognition of how important it is that we get, wherever it is possible to do so, wherever it is safe to do so, that we get our visits up and running as quickly as possible. And also to acknowledge that there is the potential for that guidance to change again, particularly once the results of the visiting testing pilot come through. I know that there is a lot of play made in the media, particularly from the government, about visiting without screens once family members are being tested. That has to be weighed against the guidance that's coming out from SAGE and from Public Health, who are saying that actually all of the mitigations, the PPE and the distancing and potentially screens will need to remain in place. So we're yet to see what the impact of that family member testing program will look like. But as soon as we know what that is, we'll be developing guidance to support you. The other thing I wanted to mention on this call was the forthcoming regulation about staff movement. So you may be aware that very shortly, government will be regulating to stop staff moving between homes and schemes where they have worked in another home and scheme in the last 14 days. Now that sounds great in principle, because we know that people moving between schemes or homes increases the spread of infection. But in practice, it's going to be very, very difficult to maintain, particularly where homes are in outbreak. Where we do have staff that move between homes and schemes, and particularly I'm thinking about where we need to use agency staff because we've got staff self-isolating as a result of outbreaks, we will need to evidence that all options have been explored. And if we can't evidence that, then there's a potential for us to be in breach of regulation. Now, I've got real concerns about that policy and the potential unintended consequences of that. We are pulling together a response to the consultation, and we will be developing guidance and a framework to help you to comply and implement that. But regardless of that regulation, the most important thing for me is that we maintain a safe staffing level to meet the needs of our residents, and we find a way to evidence that we've done that in the safest way possible. And I think the final thing around kind of wave 2 that I'd just like to flag is just a reminder that what we're seeing right the way across the piece in terms of homes that are being most significantly impacted as wave 2 unfolds, it's more likely that homes will be significantly impacted if you were less impacted in wave 1. What we're finding is that you're more vulnerable if you were not impacted in the first wave. You're more vulnerable if you're managing a larger home, and you're more vulnerable if you have residents living with dementia and those residents are mobile around the home. Now, I'm not sure that there's additional safeguards that we can put in place, but I think it's worth being aware that those are the most vulnerable homes, and you need to think very carefully about kind of compliance around PPE and safeguarding measures. And the other thing that I just want to mention is you'll be aware that we've got a very clear policy not to admit positive residents into our homes, COVID positive residents. There should be designated schemes across the country, and CQC were looking to designate about 500 schemes during the course of last month to accommodate that. I need to let you know that of that planned 500, they've only managed to get about 70 homes to come forward. And there are huge gaps in London, with only 5 homes in London being designated. There are no homes anywhere in the Southwest and 3 homes in the West Midlands. So big gaps, and that's going to create some real bottlenecks with people who can't be discharged from hospital because there aren't designated schemes for them to go to. And I expect that you as managers will come under pressure in the coming month to take residents who are COVID positive. And I just urge you to speak with your area managers, speak with your regional directors, and we need to hold the line and make sure that we keep our residents safe. And then the final thing that I'm going to talk about very briefly is one of the questions on the slide that's come up about the cost of respite care and the potential to offer 3 weeks for the price of 2. It's a bit of an unusual offer in our sector, but I think one that lots of providers are now looking at. And Current State is going to be working with the marketing team in the next week or so to look at a range of options around what we might offer to be competitive with others. But of course, we need to remain mindful, and I think as an ELT, we remain mindful of the challenges of increasing occupancy at a time when we're going into an increased wave of COVID and an increased period of outbreak or non-visiting in homes. And that's about it for me in terms of my update, other than just to reiterate my thanks to everybody in terms of all of the work that you're doing out there in relation to keeping our residents and keeping your colleagues safe. Thank you. Mandy, to you.
Sorry, didn't realise I had to unmute myself. I was waiting for that to happen. Thanks, Dan. Just picking up on a couple of things that in Dan's update. Firstly, in relation to visiting and the family testing, I know we are all eager for people to be able to do more visiting, but we have to remain vigilant about that and keep the balance between visiting and the increased insurance risks that we are now carrying as a result of the insurance market withdrawing from, COVID cover. So we will have to ensure that we remain compliant with all guidance that's issued in relation to visiting. And as Dan says, that guidance may change as we come out of lockdown and as the pilot for family testing results come in. So we will need to keep up to date on that and make sure that whatever visiting that we are able to do is compliant with the guidance so that we maintain the insurance cover that we have. And that also applies, I'll reiterate Dan's point on accepting people discharged from hospital with positive tests. At the moment, our insurers are against that happening, and we would need to speak to them and have that approved if that was ever going to change. I appreciate that managers will come under increased pressure from local authorities in the coming weeks to perhaps take residents, But if you do come under that pressure, please do contact your area managers or regional directors to get support on that issue. I'd like to add my thanks to everybody for all the work that you're continuing to do. You are so brilliant in the way that you've handled this pandemic so far, and I'd just like to say thanks and carry on. And I'll hand over to Anna.
Thanks, Mandy. The 3 points I was going to pick up today was cycle to work, the carryover of holiday, and how we support people who might be at greater risk of COVID. So the 3 issues that have been raised via Slido. So first of all, thanks to Mark Quamby, who's raised the question around cycle to work. So if you haven't heard of this before, it's a scheme that enables colleagues to commute to work by hiring bikes and making payments each month via salary. So you pay for the bike over 12 months from your gross salary. So that means you don't have to pay any tax or national insurance on the cost of the bike. So it can be a good saving for us. And then at the end of the hire period, so at the end of the 12 months, you can either purchase the bike for a notional cost, so it's quite a cheap way of getting the bike. As Mark said, the benefit is that it promotes health and well-being, and of course greener travel. So we've previously run this cycle to work scheme at MHA. We didn't do it last year, we did it the year before, 2018, and just had limited take-up. There's just a handful of people that benefited from that. But hearing the feedback, I think it's cropped up a few times. So as it feels that this will be a positive addition to our flexible benefit scheme, we'll plan that and share details with you over the coming weeks. Our flexible benefits window is in February, so we will plan for that and introduce the cycle scheme as part of our offering. So thanks for raising that, Mark. The next point was, can we carry over more holiday? So the short answer is yes. The detailed answer is that under the coronavirus regulations 2020, the government confirmed that we can carry over up to 4 weeks holiday into the next 2 holiday leave years. So that's into 2021-2 to 22-3. This law only applies to holidays not taken because of coronavirus. For example, if you've had to self-isolate for significant periods, or have been too sick to take the holiday. However, having said that, so it is an option. It is really, really important to look after yourself as best as you can. We've often referred to the pandemic as a marathon rather than a sprint. So please do take regular breaks where you can. I suppose echoing what Dan and Sam and Mandy have said, know that everyone is working really hard and doing their absolute best to support older people and each other. And as we often say, we can only do that if we're each well enough to be able to provide that support to the people we serve and to our roles and support each other. So please do take time to consider your own needs where you can. There was just a reference on Slido to the times change and employer commitment relating to mental health and well-being. That's really important, and we very much support the principles which I would say are in line with our well-being strategy. So we continue to develop and see what support we can provide both in the moment for COVID, but also longer term as part of our employer brand. So thank you for that, and we'll continue to do that. The last point was, how can we support particularly older people who may suffer more severe impacts, employees who may suffer from the impact of COVID. So I would just remind you that for people working in homes and schemes, there is a COVID risk assessment for all of us and guidance so that we continue to support each other in working safely. So if you have any concerns about your position, please do speak to your manager, have a look at the COVID risk assessment, and there is a range of support and mitigation based on that guidance. So please do refer to that. I think I'm handing over to Chris, and I would echo my thanks to everyone for all you're doing. We're working as hard as we can alongside you, so please do continue and accept our thanks for all that you do, and feel very proud to be part of MHA and contributing in such a fantastic way. So thank you to all of you.
Thanks, Anna. I've got a few things to say, responding to some of the comments on Slido about Christmas. But I think perhaps just to introduce the context to that, and echoing some of the things particularly that Dan has said earlier, obviously we're not quite clear how we will emerge in England out of the lockdown on the 2nd of December, and what circumstances and local regulations and restrictions will apply. It certainly doesn't feel at the moment, looking at the daily record of hospital admissions and so on, that we will be out of the woods, and therefore that continuing need to be very careful and to avoid anything that would be likely to contribute to transmission of the virus. Because as we've seen, and as Dan shared in that report, even with PPE being worn all the time, with control and management of visiting from the community, and with regular testing, clearly places can get into difficulty with significant outbreaks of COVID. And it's really in that context that I chaired a committee looking at a number of things that would be different this year around Christmas because of COVID. And that was the advice that went out, and you could link through to it from Manager's Digest last week. The comments that have come back in particular, obviously there is, I think, disappointment that Christmas, which is such a fantastic time of year in our homes and schemes, it absolutely is, and we really go to town normally, it's going to have to be a little bit, or perhaps more than a little bit, different this year to keep that balance of safety and COVID security alongside celebration. So we've looked at those things perhaps where we could do more, and particularly where it is appropriate, you know, the idea of extending or expanding external lighting so that our homes aren't places that are kind of in darkness within the community, but are lit and attractive, so that both people close to our homes, but more particularly our residents, can look out of windows and see celebration of Christmas. Obviously very safe to be able to do that. Great visual impact, but not something people are going to be touching. Inside homes and schemes, it's a little bit more problematic, and the guidance does talk with excellent input from our infection control leads. It does talk about what perhaps we can do differently this year, just to make sure that surfaces remain easy to clean and maintain that very, very high standard of infection control that we absolutely have to maintain due to COVID. That obviously affects groups who would normally come into our homes and schemes. We think of local schools coming in, community choirs, all sorts of things at Christmas. That isn't going to be possible, but other places outdoors where perhaps if the regulations allow, a small group of up to 6 people could come. We've had some national discussions with the Salvation Army. They have issued their own guidance to their instrumentalists, and they can envisage that in some cases, if the local church, the local branch of the Salvation Army is open and operating, that perhaps people could come and play outside, where they can be both seen and heard by residents. So I think it's a question of thinking creatively and looking imaginatively at what is possible to do, perhaps to do differently this year, but absolutely to celebrate and keep Christmas. We will take comments and feedback very seriously, and I've already had some discussions today with Helen and Yolanda about this. There was a question that related to Christmas jumpers, always a festive favourite across everything in MHA. As you will appreciate, I think one of the concerns about this is that the normal standards of infection control laundering aren't possible, or as we said, preparing for this call, unless you want to end up with an extremely teeny weeny jumper, washing at high temperatures is difficult. It's not possible to do in every situation, but Yolanda and Helen will, I think, provide some additional advice or suggested alternatives to that. We want things to happen, but as Dan has said with Hafen, you know, we don't want people to have to face or experience the exhaustion and stress that can happen when a home is badly affected, and we need to be vigilant and careful at the same time as we want to encourage celebration. And lastly from me, there's a question on Slido about the £10, as I think many, if not all of you will know. The tradition has been in MHA for a little while that at Christmas there is £10 contribution which can be put towards the cost of a meal or something celebratory for Christmas for every member of staff. That will happen again this year, but because people can't go out to celebrate together in most, if not all cases, what we are going to be doing is allocating that funding. Victoria is going to put it all somewhere very nicely with a budget line on it, and managers will be able to draw down relative to the number of staff within their teams, the number of colleagues they work with, that amount of money for something that is appropriate for the setting, because it's really difficult this year to say what that will mean for each and all. However, I would really encourage managers, please discuss this with your teams, unless you've got a fabulous surprise you don't want to alert them to. Please have those conversations. How can that contribution be used meaningfully to do something this Christmas to say thank you and to mark the season across MHA? It's perhaps a very small gesture, but we didn't want to lose sight of that this Christmas of all Christmases. And finally, just to extend my thanks as well for everything everybody is doing. I know it is unbelievably difficult. People have been wearing PPE for the kinds of length of time none of us want to imagine through the heat of summer and now into winter. It's an extraordinarily long, arduous haul that people are doing amazing work. Please don't think it is unrecognised or unappreciated. It absolutely isn't. Thank you. I think now I'm handing over to Andy.
You are. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I can see a few of you are struggling with Zoom. I am myself, hence I've connected on my phone instead of the laptop. I got booted out. We've had a quick look at it. It appears that the problems at Zoom's end as opposed to ours. Quite a few of you are joining us today via the United States. You probably don't realise it, but you are. And that seems to happen when the UK and European connection isn't performing as well as it should. So just bear with us. There's very little we can do about it. If we can, we'll get it sorted, but it seems to be at Zoom's end. There's a comment on Slido, a question on Slido about the longer term future of Epworth House, and will post-COVID, will we return to full occupancy? I think we all know in the short term occupancy has been reduced because of the COVID secure requirements. And we're actually remodelling Epworth House now to provide spaces so that teams can meet safely within those requirements. But we're also remodelling it with a bit of an eye to the future so that we can facilitate smarter and more flexible ways of working in the longer term as well. Those works will be starting in the next week or so, and they will be all completed by January and fully up and running at that stage. And that will also include the community's digital studio, which is very exciting and will allow communities to get on and do all their digital resources based in Epworth House rather than having to outsource all that. So that's really, really positive. SLG will shortly be will be asked to look at their team's longer term working arrangements, looking at the ability for roles to continue at home, maybe a mix of working from home and working back at the office. And clearly we need to look at two sides of this. We need to look at what is required in terms of the charity, the business, what we need to do. But we also want to look at colleagues' needs and preferences as well. And we'll be able to produce a balance that gives flexibility both ways. but we will not ultimately be returning to Epworth House as previously, as pre-COVID. Part of that review, in terms of the longer term arrangements, we will be shortly sending out a questionnaire to people around the kit that they actually need to continue working effectively. We put together a whole load of interim solutions which have been okay, but we recognise they're far from ideal. And so we'll be asking people again in the short term what they actually need to continue working from home on the revised arrangements. I do apologise, it is taking longer than I'd certainly hoped for, but hopefully over the next couple of weeks you'll start to see some real progress around those questionnaires and consultation with your managers. So again, thanks everybody for the work they're doing. Again, it sounds as though I'm just repeating, but I need to. You're all doing a ridiculously amazing job, so thank you very much. I'm now going to hand over to Victoria.
Thanks, Andy. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm feeding back our response to the queries we've had regarding costs of working from home. And so we've been working on guidance to address those colleagues who've been adversely financially impacted by the move from office work to working from home. So we're proposing to reimburse those colleagues who overall are incurring additional costs. So in line with HMRC guidance, the maximum colleagues will be able to apply for is £6 a week, which equates to £26 per month. And as I say, that's HMRC limits. And this will be backdated to the 1st of October 2020. So we're only going to require one application and then the payment will be made monthly via payroll. We'll be taking into account savings such as travel or parking to offset any additional costs that have been incurred, such as increased energy or other utility bills. So this arrangement is going to be temporary to the end of January. And as Andy said, by which point we'll hope to have established a longer term position. Applications should be made within the next few weeks, and further information and the application form will be coming out from internal comms in the next day or so. And I would like to add my thanks to everybody in the organisation. You're all doing a fantastic job and you are so greatly appreciated by everybody on ELT and the board and all your other colleagues. So thank you very much, everybody. And back to Sam for any additional questions we've had.
Launched in without unmuting myself. Sorry about that, folks. So yeah, we've got a couple of questions that I'm going to feed to Dan and then Anna, and then I'm going to do a bit of a wrap up in terms of just a final couple of points and respond to one question. So Dan, there's been a question that's come in, is can we have designated pods or areas in retirement living for visitors so they don't have to stand outside and chat through a window? And then another point related again to retirement living is hospital social workers are just start discharging tenants back into retirement living, even when advised that we can't accommodate them. Have you got a view on either of those?
I think the second one is probably a simpler one to answer, because it's I imagine that the answer to that relates to people's rights to be discharged back to their own homes. And there's clearly a difference between being discharged into a retirement living environment as opposed to a care home environment. But where those residents or tenants are coming with additional care needs, then clearly we need to be thinking about whether we can accommodate those care needs, and that should be taken into account as part of that. But I'll pick that question up with ELT and with area managers, and we'll look to develop some guidance that enables people to be able to respond more robustly if they've got concerns that residents and tenants are being discharged back home with an expectation that we will pick up care needs where we may not be able to do so. In relation to pods or areas in retirement living, it's a broad question, and I think I'll probably need to pick that up separately and happy to undertake to do that and to take a review both in partnership with area managers but also with Andy and his team in relation to how feasible that is. It will be different in different schemes. And the costs associated with that, and how quickly we can do that in a way that is safe. So yeah, not something I can answer immediately, but happy to take it away and work on that over the course of the next week.
Right, thanks very much indeed, Dan. Anna, could you answer the next question, please, which is, can staff who have been furloughed carry leave over?
I think I'm going to have to come back on that, Sam. I'll just need to double check on that. I think so, but I'll have to go back to the guidance.
Okay, so if we can, that would be great if we can include that in the midweek comms tomorrow, just as a kind of a pick-up note, so that that's responded to. The last question who's going to pick up is one where somebody's contacted saying, when you think it's reasonable to escalate queries where managers, often senior managers, don't respond, it devalues staff and even directors are at fault. I would respond to that by saying, please continue to raise matters if you feel that they do need to be escalated. And where that then doesn't get picked up, follow it up above to the next person in the management line, right up through to myself, and if it's with me, to the board. We want this to be an organisation where people do feel heard, where matters get resolved in the most immediate context that they possibly can, i.e. with the person's actual line manager. But if that doesn't happen, we need to have an organisation which responds swiftly and where matters don't sit or fester. So please take me at my word. This organisation is a fantastic group of people who make such amazing differences in the lives of the people that they work with and in their colleagues' lives. I want it to be the best organisation it can possibly be, and for us to be mutually supportive of one another. So please do persist with that and jump the next one above if you don't feel that you're getting a response from your own manager, because I want this to be the right kind of organisation where people feel heard. My final point is just as a kind of a flag to you that tomorrow evening, on Thursday evening this week on BBC Two at 9 o'clock, there's a documentary called Lockdown 1.0 Following the Science. And we're taking part in the documentary. A number of interviews took place with myself and Jason and Pav. I think they've ended up just using my clips for the actual documentary itself. But what it's doing is it's telling the story of how the scientists reached the conclusions that they did in the first phase of the pandemic, and fundamentally how they didn't listen to what was being told to them by the likes of ourselves in terms of the care sector. And it's in some ways a bit of an echo of the work that we did with Newsnight, but it's placing it in a context where it shows just how we were trying to lobby for testing, how we were starting to pick up on people who were asymptomatic fairly early doors. And so it'll be an interesting watch. I haven't seen the actual programme itself. I'm hoping it's going to come out okay, but I just wanted to flag it with colleagues that we're out there still lobbying. And I just want you to know that we are continuing to lobby. Dan is on, along with Helen, on some of the most senior working groups that there are at the moment in the Department of Health, Social Care, trying to lobby around the continued needs and testing, working on all the issues in relation to visitors and those visiting our homes. And we continue to try and lobby and be contacted on a regular basis by media and by people in policy positions. So MHA has really come to the fore, and that's largely because of the competence and the credibility and the worth of what it is that's happening out in the field. So a final thank you from me for all that you're doing and for your continuing commitment, your dedication to the people that you work alongside. These are tough times, and I think I'm certainly experiencing lockdown 2 probably as being a bit lower than maybe we thought, but I'm aware that this is taking its toll. But we need to continue to support one another, to be vigilant, keep each other safe, and to try and enable each other to work in a way that enables people to live later life well and makes work a good place to be. And I know that day after day, you're seeking to do that. So a huge thanks from me, and thank you from not only all the colleagues on ELT, but also our board who we met with last week. and were so full of praise. Many of them had attended the managers conference last week. They couldn't believe the sense of spirit and determination and dedication that they were hearing back from our colleagues across the organisation. So a huge thank you to everybody on behalf of myself, ELT and the board. Take care and have a good rest of the week. And I hope that we will, we haven't got the date fixed, but we'll be having the next ELT live. So ELT 11 will be in December before Christmas. So take care, and we'll maybe try and wear Christmas jumpers, but I'm not promising anything. Take care, folks.